So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Esther Dyson, and first, I just want to thank Tom Main and Terry and the whole Oliver Wyman family for inviting the greater Wellville communities and their partners and advisors and everybody else to be part of your conference here. They kind of adopted us, and we're very grateful. So I'm delighted to be here. What I want to do in the next 12 minutes is first briefly explain what the Way to Wellville is, and then if we have time, and if anybody's brave enough, there's a mic up here in front. I find it's often easier to explain things by answering people's questions than by putting them all into one beautiful flowing speech. So let me start with just a little bit of context. I was indeed an analyst of the tech industry, and back in the 90s, I began to think about the impact of the internet on intellectual property. I thought it would be very disruptive. I got invited to speak to a group of music companies about this, and they really did not like my message. So they threw dinner rolls at me, the messenger. And to some extent, walking into a healthcare community, it's the same. Because I'm not really talking about fixing healthcare. I'm talking about producing so much health that healthcare becomes much less necessary. That would actually, it may be difficult for your companies, but for you and your families, for the country, for the economy, it would be great news. And our goal is to try and prove this, how to do it. This all began I'm looking at the date here, 5 or 6 years ago with the healthcare, not the health, but the Healthcare X Prize that was to be funded by WellPoint for $10+ million. It would take a number of populations, a number of contestants, perhaps companies like Oliver Wyman or an insurance company or somebody with a diabetes program, would compete to win the prize for producing the greatest reduction in costs and the greatest increase in good health outcomes. For some reason, it never happened. And I had been excited about this, but I felt that healthcare was remedial, and I started getting more and more interested in the quantified self, these devices, how to produce health rather than how to recapture it. And I thought somebody should do a Health X Prize. A year and a bit ago, I was about to give a talk about how someone else should run such a contest. And I realized that is a really lame speech. Someone else should, so I announced it. Then I had to figure out what was I going to do. And I held a bunch of brainstormings, got very lucky. Somebody came to one of them and asked a whole lot of awkward questions, the kinds I hope you'll ask if there's time. How are you going to fund this thing? What are you going to measure? And how are you actually going to improve health? How do you do that? And I hired this man. His name's Rick Brush. And from what I had, which was the Health Initiative Coordinating Council, very accurate name, but not really, doesn't really make anybody's heart sing. Rick Brush came along. He's here along with about 100 of us Wellville people, and helped turn Hiccup into a real life project with branding, with vision. Rick's background is at Cigna and in marketing, and also in asthma prevention. So we're a nice complementary pair, and we got to work. As I flew across the country on some of my old kinds of work, I would look down and think, could this place be Wellville? Could this be the magic community that's going to get healthy? Rick and I put out a call, along with our 4 advisors, who are also here, for applications, and got 41 valid applications from communities all over the country. We had to select only 5 because our resources are limited, both financially, but just in terms of attention. You can't So we organized our summer tour and visited 10 sites. It was a lot of fun. It was inspiring. We learned a ton. There's nothing like visiting real places to learn both real problems and pick up clever solutions. This is what we ended up with. We ended up with the 5 Wellville communities, Clatsop County, Washington, Lake County, California, Niagara Falls, New York, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and Greater Muskegon, Michigan. You can see them on the map. You can probably see them. And then the other 36 communities that applied were not losers. They simply weren't the 5 that we selected, not just for being, quote, the best, but also for having the greatest diversity among themselves. Clatsop County, it's Care Oregon, the local Medicaid provider, that is leading the coalition. In Spartanburg, it's the Mary Black Foundation. Each community, we required to have a coalition of people who are already doing something. We're closer to a business accelerator that's looking for a formed team. We wanted places that would be successful because we want them to demonstrate how to do it. We weren't trying to have a contest and have winners and losers. We really would like 5 different models of how this can work, led by different kinds of coalitions in different kinds of conditions. The only criteria was that each community should be 100,000 people or less, that they should be geographically isolated. This is to have, as I said earlier, a pseudo-clinical trial. At least your data is somewhat coherent. If you change conditions in the community, people are not going to the next community over or to a suburb to eat different food, to experience different conditions. So they ended up being mostly pretty rural places, pretty far away from an airport. So that map I showed you of where we flew, then we had to drive 2 hours. So we picked these places, and 9 of them are here today. In these communities, these are our core constituents. These are the people for whom change is easiest. And frankly, these are people who will bring messages home to their parents. We are working with the health systems on the kind of people that Ruchika Fernandopulle is working with, the frequent flyers, if you like. They save a lot of money. They can generate cost savings that can be applied. But if you want to produce health for the future, you need to deal with these core constituents, with school lunches, with early childhood education, so all these things that we know work. And we're not doing this in a year. We've got 5 places, 5 metrics, 5 years. And our pitch to those of you in the audience is these are communities that want to be successful. They've demonstrated already a lot of capability to create coalitions. They are doing health interventions. They've got great ideas. One of my favorites is in Spartanburg. I was sitting next to the sheriff who runs the jail, who told me, we have the same customers as the mental health services, so we're now working together with them. That saves a lot of money. It's innovative, and it's the kind of thing that shows people are thinking hard about how to produce health beforehand rather than when it's too late. So if you have a clever idea, a nifty product, a program, if you happen to be one of the payers or providers that works in any of the 41 communities I showed you up there, and you can find out about us at hiccup.co, we would welcome you. What Hiccup does is indeed coordinate. We're not the funder, we're not the manager. We are trying to help these communities just as a business accelerator would help a business to succeed. And the reason for this is a chart you've already seen in many forms already. What matters to health? 90%, for better or worse, is what happens outside of the clinic. Where we spend is in the healthcare system. We want to help you healthcare systems move outside the clinic. This is what this entire conference is about in one form or another, to reach people before they come into your emergency rooms, before they fill up your beds. And that's where the real outcomes are also determined. So we will be measuring these things. We had a very interesting conversation just an hour ago in this very room about what to measure and how. But we look at this measurement this way. It's not simply measuring things after the fact. It's mastery learning. It's measuring as you go to see the impact of the behaviors, of the changing food conditions, of the bike paths, of the employer wellness programs, and the impact of all these things reinforcing one another to make something wonderful happen. So I now have exactly 1 minute left for questions. If someone wants to run up to the mic, I would be happy to answer it, or I have 1 or 2 questions of my own I could answer in the minute I have left. Any brave soul want to just shout something? Yeah, here we go, great. And fortunately, he's sitting near the front. Maybe he's a plant.
I think when you're designing all this, you're looking at the frequent flyers. I think the underutilizers are more of a cost. And with the market in Niagara Falls, I'm from Buffalo, New York, trust is still a problem with healthcare. How are you addressing some of those issues?
Okay, so it's very complicated. The frequent flyers is where you save the money short term. The underutilizers, the people who aren't sick yet, the kids, they're harder to reach. There's many more of them, and it's much harder to make a business case for that. So part of what we're trying to do is develop new business models and also new metrics to show the value of these early interventions. You know, what's the financial benefit of health initiatives that get kids to stay in school longer, that keep mental patients on their drugs, out of the jails or the hospitals, which is why it's going to take 5 years. It's going to take a lot of data collection. It's going to take philanthropy in the short run, as well as social impact investing. What we're doing for the communities is helping them on the things that are harder for a single community to do, whether it's getting waivers on Medicaid regulations from states, working with financial institutions to do contracts with communities around, if you save money in the jail, but it's the healthcare system that saved the money, how do you get that money back into the right pockets? And so I sound very glib talking here because I have -1 minute, but this is part of our challenge. And the Accountable Care Act, the whole idea of hospitals now doing community needs assessment and focusing more and more on outcomes, the fact that pharmas are now looking at not simply selling pills, but also trying to cure disease. We want to lean in and using collective action and often philanthropic investment, show how it could work possibly at larger scale if there were financial instruments or legal requirements that could make that happen. And we would love your help doing that. Now, it's my delightful duty to invite out our panel of millennials. And I'm going to sit down with them. We're going to have, this time we will actually be using audience questions because we have 35 minutes. So please welcome our millennials. Oops, I think, okay, great. So I'm going to ask each of you to give a minute or two of self-introduction. And I don't know how much you've been briefed. These people, with luck, you don't spend much time with them. You're healthy. And I'm just going to move over because there's some. With luck, you're healthy, but you may have experience of ill health in your families. And what we're trying to do is not so much understand how you think about healthcare, but how you think about health itself. Do you even pay attention to the healthcare system? The truth is, these are an unusually educated bunch of kids, and so they have a little more experience with the healthcare system than your average, but they are also real people. So Alyssa, let's start with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa Bridges. I am a Director of Event Management for DeMars Meetings and Events, and I'm currently studying to get my master's degree in Integrated Marketing Communications. Admittedly, don't have a ton of background in healthcare, but a lot of research just on my own, learning new things. So I'm excited to be here and be a part of it.
And how come you're wearing that nice blue sweater? I've seen that color today already.
I am lucky enough to be a part of the team that has put MetaFuture together. And if you ever have any questions or need anything, you can find one of us in the pretty blue sweaters, and we're happy to help.
Thank you, and all your colleagues. Go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Deontay Madden. I'm currently a senior at the University of Central Florida. I'm studying health service administration, and I know about healthcare just through classes and textbooks, but I haven't had much experience in it, so I'm just here to share my experience I've had so far.
I'm Klaus Grimm. I'm a student at the University of Tampa, majoring in allied health. I'm currently a medical assistant at my university's health clinic. And I have a passion for healthcare, looking to go into the PA field and hoping I can provide some perspective.
Hello, my name is Kevin Jenkins. Moved to Tampa about 4 years ago to finish up my undergraduate degree at the University of Tampa, where I'm currently doing my master's in finance. Work in corporate strategy for a finance company, so quite different than healthcare, but I'm very passionate about living an active, healthy lifestyle, so excited to be here today.
So you what?
I was just saying, you know, I live a pretty active, healthy lifestyle, so I'm excited to be here.
And which one of you is the vegan?
Is what?
The vegan.
Oh.
You. Okay, great. Tell us about that.
My name's Phil Michaels, and yes, I guess you could call me a vegan. I am a student at University of Tampa. I was a pre-medicine undergrad, worked for the team physician of the New York Yankees, and I am currently getting an MBA with a concentration in entrepreneurship and a Master's of Science in Marketing.
My name is James Zabrowski. I started with the University of Tampa, 4 years ago. I just graduated in May. I'm now a full-time employee in the new entrepreneurship program over there, and I'm going to start my master's degree in spring. So I'm happy to be here today.
And so which of you thinks, you're going to be a physician's assistant, which of you thinks a career either in healthcare or investing in healthcare is the way to go?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, one more time.
Well, you've sort of already answered it. You're going to be a physician's assistant. Yes. What draws you to that career, and why do you want to be an assistant rather than a physician?
As a PA, I think I have more autonomy, more contact with my patients, whereas doctors are more behind the scene nowadays, and I really want to stress the importance of preventative medicine, and I feel a lot of medicine today is is business and politics, and I feel that a lot of our research and focus is on curing certain diseases and ailments, when I think it's more important to kind of address preventing it and stopping it in the first place from happening. So that's kind of my drive to want to be a PA and have that contact with my patients and stress that.
So do people out in the audience agree with him? Dead silence.
I hope so.
And you investor types, do you think healthcare is a big market, or is he right and it's more about prevention?
I would agree. I think we could all agree there's a paradigm shift in the way healthcare is going from a traditional approach to a more preventative approach. And now it's just about finding out the disruptive technologies that will help innovate a user-friendly platform for not only the physicians and healthcare providers, but also for the patients. I think that's what us millennials are looking for.
So Which of you has a tracking device? What about no one else? Nobody? Does that surprise you?
Yes, absolutely. I would say the majority of millennials do wear wearable technology with regard to health and quantified self. I think utilizing metrics based on genomics or nutraceuticals, as well as your heart rate and other types of methodologies where we can find out where we are and where we need to be in order to optimize our preventative health care, then I think that's the way we all should be thinking. And I think most millennials are currently doing that. I just might be one of 6 right now.
Phil's
So
an early adopter.
how come the rest of you aren't wearing these? Aren't they cool?
Mine's on my phone, so I just don't have it on me at the moment.
I see. Yeah, you turned your phone off for the.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have one as well. I'm just not currently wearing it. And also, I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for improvement in regards to that technology. So I use it, but I'm not a tremendous fan at the moment. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, as with most technology when it
Yeah.
first comes live. So.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have one. My parents actually bought me one for Christmas. I think I used it once, and I never used it again. I really just, like he was saying, I think there's a lot of improvements for it. I just don't like it on my wrist. And
What didn't? Interesting. What about if so? Jawbone is here. Maybe you should be nice to them.
I'm sorry. I apologize. No.
But what about the Apple iWatch? Would you wear that?
Yes. I'm very much looking forward to the Apple iWatch. Very much. I will be waiting in line on Friday to get my iPhone 6 and looking forward to the health app as well.
So how many of you, even if you don't wear things other than you, how many of you, do you have health apps on your phone?
I do, yeah.
Okay, so tell us what those are and what they mean to you.
Well, I work for a company back north called Town Sports International, and we actually utilize a software called MotionSoft, which is able to track all of your workouts and everything. We're a fitness company out of New York, Boston, Washington, and Philadelphia. So there's an app that we download in addition to that. As a member, you can track and everything. So that's the only fitness app that I actually use, but I'm biased, so.
I currently use Sleep Cycle most predominantly, I think. And what it does is track my sleeping habits, including my heart rate, my breathing patterns, as well as the quality of my sleep, through which it tracks the cycles that I maintain throughout my sleeping. And then there's also an app called PowerNap, which definitely helps out as a college student. we try to fit those in as much as possible, and it tells you exactly what time you would need to go to sleep and what time to wake up in order to optimize your sleeping quality. And in addition to that, I've been studying Cambrian genomics to find out what genetic testing we can implement into our own lives. Silicon Valley, I think, is ahead of the game when it comes to this, but Tampa is close behind. And I think what I'm looking for myself is an app that provides the exact quantifiable data to tell me exactly how much of nutrients I need, micronutrients and macronutrients per day for my body to achieve its optimal results and optimal performance every single day.
And
So, Phil, you need X amount of lycopene per day, so that means you need to eat X amount of tomatoes or the equivalent every single day for your body to reach its peak performance. In addition, doctors will be able to allow us the exact dosage by microgram for medications, so that way we're properly receiving the dosage that we need rather than just a range.
So you're a college student. How many hours a night do you sleep?
Myself?
Yeah.
Being a graduate student, it's not really consistent right now, but it could range anywhere from an hour and a half to 7.5 hours.
And so I'm supposed to believe that you're going to have the right amount of lycopene if you know what it is?
And I guess that's where the app comes in.
At least he'll know, right?
Yeah.
At least I'll know what I'm doing wrong.
Any other thoughts on that? And then I want to ask take another line of questioning. Then, audience, please do come up. This is a great panel of people to ask things.
Well, from my end, first of all, I need that Power Nap app like today, so I'll be downloading that later. Mine's mostly tracking steps and kind of exercise routines and things I can do when we're not on site. Much of our work is at our desk and things, so I've been trying to keep up with tracking steps, making sure I'm not sitting in one place too much, mostly because it get a little stir crazy, but that's part of my big thing with apps for fitness.
I personally don't use the technology. I think it's great. I do have this one app, it's called Sworkit. So, you know, when I do need to work out, I have this little app that just tells me certain exercises to do in my own room. But I personally don't, you know, these apps track your numbers, and, you know, I just think it's important to maintain a healthy lifestyle in general, just because I don't want to live by numbers. But I do think it's important for, you know, where we are today for the general population.
Deontay?
Yeah, I was a student probably from like the age of 9 until my sophomore year of college. So I never really used apps that often. I have an exercise app, but it wasn't natural for me. Like you said, I don't want to live my life by numbers either. I'd rather just go and work out just because that's what I'm used to doing. So from a student athlete's perspective, the apps really aren't that useful because you kind of already know your body and what's best for you.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, I'll echo the same thing. I don't use any apps today, but certainly exercise daily, eat relatively healthy. The only, I guess, apps, which is, I guess, a little divergent, is I've used things like Lumosity and so forth, more brain training apps, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I've used things like that, but that's, I guess, I don't want to diverge the conversation there.
So you're actually an unusually healthy bunch, statistically. I'd love to hear about the last time any of you went to the doctor, what it was like, what that experience was. Somebody volunteer?
Yeah, I can actually. I just went to the ER probably like 2 weeks ago. I was driving and I had a panic attack while I was driving, so I had to go to the ER. Apparently, it was like a bad sinus infection, but I mean, I had a great experience. I got in. The waiting time wasn't that long. They took me through every test I can possibly think of. I think I did every test you could do in the hospital that day. But I have insurance, so it was no big deal for me. My insurance brought it up. I paid the $50 copay, and then I walked out the door, and that's what happened. It was a great experience.
Thank you, everybody, for any other such experiences?
I had a slightly different experience, actually. I swim and I separated my shoulder, and I actually, I'm double jointed, so I just naturally have looser ligaments. Do you want me to show?
Yeah, sure.
I showed Esther the other day and she thought it was fun, but I'm not sure how many of you are going to be able to see, but I can, the front sees it, okay. So I kind of have a history of my shoulder popping in and out of place. So when I went to the doctor, my initial doctor couldn't do anything. I had to get sent to a completely different location to actually get the x-ray done. And then I never actually got a call back for what my results were. So to this day, we're still connected. I assume everything's fine, but don't actually know 100% for sure what happened.
And who paid for the x-ray?
My mother.
I experienced trauma to the eye once. Last time I was injured, I guess, or sick. My sophomore year of college, and you know, part of our tuition, we get a health insurance, and this is before I actually started working there. And you know, I actually had to go see a specialist, and I mean, I guess I had a positive experience because the insurance covered a lot of it, but it was a lot of, you know, first, you know, going to the primary care office to get a referral. You know, I wish I could have just went directly to the specialist because I knew I needed to see the specialist.
How long did that take? I mean, was it days or weeks?
Yeah, it took about a week. And the primary care physician that saw me said, you know, I don't even know how you haven't lost vision yet. So that was a little scary.
And presumably you weren't very productive that week.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I actually had mono about 2.5 months ago or so. And like I said, I'm from Pennsylvania, but moved to Tampa about 4 years ago. So I I know this is horrible, but I did not have an established doctor here. So my initial reaction was I woke up very ill one day and went to the urgent care. You know, I work full time, so I have health insurance. Went to urgent care. They did like a throat swab, said it wasn't strep throat because I said I was prone to that as a child. And so they just gave me antibiotics and sent me home. I took the antibiotics, felt a little bit better, but not 100%. So went back about 2 days later. And so this time they gave me more antibiotics and steroids. And that still did not prevent what was happening. So I was still feeling ill. So then I decided, you know, maybe I need to try something different. So I actually established a doctor, went somewhere else. She ran blood work and found out that I had mono. So, you know, certainly kind of a frustrating experience, I guess. It would have been, I certainly would have hoped they would have ran the blood work the first time around and not the third time, but needless to say, I'm better now, so.
I guess I'm kind of biased because I was a pre-med undergrad and worked in healthcare before, so I had an established physician here just because I know that's important to have. And I just recently went for my annual physical 2 weeks ago, and it's interesting. I feel this is happening more so nowadays, is that the physicians are less and less educated on the nutrition side of it, of things, and they were actually asking me questions because they've been keeping track. I've been a vegan for over a year now, and so they're asking questions to me about, you know, how it's changed because my blood work has significantly improved even within 6 weeks of changing my diet. And so I guess my frustration comes from I wish the physicians and other healthcare providers would educate themselves more on the nutrition side of it rather than the pharmaceutical side. And there's got to be a cognitive dissonance going on in their heads because they're not being paid for telling me to go make my own tomatoes in my backyard or eat non-GMO products. And so it's not their fault. There's definitely something that needs to change with regard to how the big corporations and insurance companies are operating, how our healthcare providers are treating the patients. And I think what's going to eventually happen is their physicians will be more so a guidance on our board for the patient rather than an actual direct care provider.
Okay, so again, invite someone to come up. I just want to know, does any of you smoke or drink more than, I don't know, 2 drinks a night? None of you?
Wine on the weekend.
I certainly have on the weekends. But
You've also been taught to answer no to that question.
Does anybody have someone in their family who smokes? Or a friend who smokes?
Yes.
And why can't they stop?
I honestly am not too sure. It's actually my grandmother who smokes. She started smoking when she was 12. And then, I'll be honest, I'm not sure how old she was when I came along. But she stopped because when I was kind of like 5, my dad taught me to ask her to. So she stopped for a little while, but just recently she took up again, and I'm truthfully not too sure why she can't stop, even though she's on oxygen and has to be on it all the time and can't breathe. And we kind of joke around and call our house like the mobile blast zone because she'll forget to take off her oxygen and will continue to smoke. So it's an adventure, but I kind of wish I knew so we could fix it.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, my mother and her side of the family is from Spain, and it's kind of built into the culture, which I think is terrible. You know, and there are times where I stress, can you please stop? Or, you know, we've all been concerned because we all know the stats of, you know, and all the causes of smoking and such. But I guess there's just no will. I think it's a motivation thing more than, because it's so addictive, you know. And to kind of overcome that, you really need something inspiring to get you over it.
Okay, so we have someone coming up to ask a question. Then after that, I'm going to ask you what you do that makes no sense.
Hi, thank you guys all. I appreciate the perspective. It gives everybody a fresh view and lens to see from as opposed to the single lens that usually people are looking from. So my name is Connie Mester. I have Thrive for 7. It's a women-owned behavioral health startup in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have lots of questions, but I'll just stick to maybe one or two. So what gives you the strongest emotional connection to something? And if you could put that in a mobile world or mobile application or some sort of device, how would you see that transforming?
She's asking you what incentives would make you change, I think,
Not
right?
just the
No-
sensor, just what gives you
but I mean,
emotional connection?
Emotional incentives.
Emotional connection. And how could you see that emotional connection being bridged in a mobile device?
I mean, I'll start, I guess. I think, at least personally, when I think of mobile applications or anything in regards to technology, it has to be extremely intuitive, right? So I use it, I have no learning curve as to how to use it. So very simple, intuitive, but then also has some benefit, right? I mean, I don't want to use an app where I'm uncomfortable with the results that it's providing to me. So I think, intuitive design and results oriented are the two big themes for me.
I would say the two major components would be user friendliness. We're learning in marketing right now that every click or action step you have to take on an app or a website, you lose 30% of your market. So I think user friendliness is number one. We're getting things that are coming to us faster and faster, so that short-term gratification I think is huge. And then two is gamification. So that's the reason Nike Plus has done so well, is because you're able to gamify something and share that with other people. So we're all competing with people all over the world.
So let me try this a slightly different angle. I was going to ask you what you still do that you know you really shouldn't do. And what would induce you not to do it? Would it be, like a picture of your girlfriend? Would it be an encouraging, is it, one big question is it competing with someone to do better, or is it collaborating with someone to build something together? What makes you warm and fuzzy and
I have a lot of life goals, and Phil is the same way. We both have a 10-year plan and a 5-year plan, and where we want to be and what we're going to do. And it's not an if, it's a when, and how we're going to do it. So we're very definitive. But in that sense, if I am about to sit down and have an elaborate meal, I'm probably going to hold back a little bit, knowing that 10 years down the road, I want to be healthy. I want to be able to be extremely active, and I don't ever really see myself slowing down. So that is really my motivation at the end day. So I need to keep going.
So you should definitely insure this guy. He's a good risk. Any other thoughts?
Well, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying what stops us from doing a bad habit and replacing it with a good habit?
Yeah, I mean, suppose, I don't know, you don't sleep enough. What would make
perfect.
you go to bed early?
Okay, so this just happened. So I usually wasn't going to sleep till 6:45, 7 in the morning. And I just always told myself, I'm a night owl. This is when I get most of my creative thinking done. And I just realized that it's just a story I'm telling myself. There's no reason that I can't wake up earlier and completely shift my internal clock. And I knew that it was most important for my longevity and energy for my health. And so I live with 3 of my buddies. We're all self-improvement junkies, and one of them wanted the same goal. And so we made a pact to each other. We said, tomorrow morning, this happened last Friday, we are going to wake up at 6:45 in the morning, no matter what. We're both going to wake each other up, and we're going to start our morning rituals. And so we did it the very next day. We just made it a goal. We made a pact to each other, and now we hold each other accountable. And since then, every single day, it's worked. And I think the accountability component is the gamification I was talking about.
Yeah.
Any other, yeah.
I personally think that if you keep yourself extremely busy with things, you don't really have time to have bad habits. I mean,
You'd be amazed.
I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
Deontay.
I think for me, it's more so if like a family friend, like if, for example, if I did smoke and they would say, like you really need to stop smoking, or if I had to go to the hospital due to something with smoking, or I saw like a family member pass away from it, I think more so of like personal relationships I have really affect me stopping like a bad habit.
So, some more questions? How do you think about healthcare? I mean, you're up here talking about it, but I would imagine in your daily lives, you think a lot about nutrition. But do you think about, how often do you think about this? Or just give the audience some sense of how important they are to you, or not.
I just know that I'm insured, and if I go to the doctor, I'm going to be able to be taken care of, and I know that I'm safe. So that's kind of where I think the majority of us are.
Do you agree?
I think there's a disconnect. I think I know what you're asking. There's definitely a disconnect between the current healthcare providers and maybe our parents' generations versus Gen Y or the millennials. And I think the biggest change needs to be the preventative approach and realizing that we don't really want to be told what to do. And I don't take medications since switching my diet. I haven't been sick in years, and it's changed my life. I've had less sleep and more energy than I've ever had before. And so I've really seen how much just changing your diet can mean. And I used to, I worked in healthcare, so I saw us treating patients with degenerative diseases and metabolic diseases that all they needed was diet, sleep, and exercise. And so to me, that was unethical, and that's one of the main reasons I'm no longer working in traditional healthcare.
Well, I work with a group of nurse practitioners, and the director is actually one of our nurse practitioners, and I see her put her business aspect into her patient care, and I don't think that's where medicine should be at right now, at least my opinion with business. It's just unfortunate to see her take up that business role, and providers are just doing everything to keep themselves insured and safe from malpractice and things like that, and I think that's where a lot of constantly referring to a new specialist and not focusing on the whole person right there and then, and taking that nutrition aspect and preventing further things.
But, I mean, there is also people who do get sick, whether it's because they lacked the self-discipline or they were unlucky, or maybe they didn't have access to what you have access to. And how do you think, any thoughts about that? And then I'm going to take your question.
I feel then we have to motivate these people then somehow. I know exactly what you mean. People are just constantly being seen because they're just living their everyday life, and I guess that's something that has to be part of the practice. I guess a way to inspire people to further improve themselves and.
Yeah. But you didn't get mono on purpose, did you?
Exactly. I mean, I think a huge thing is just start educating children at a very young age. I mean, growing up, I ate extremely unhealthy. It actually didn't start until, around college or towards the end of my college. I gained a lot of weight, was not sleeping a lot, and so forth. And that's when I was like, I need to change this. And so I started eating a lot healthier. I actually bought the NutriBullet. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but it's like, go ahead.
What made you make that change? I mean, you probably knew you were unhealthy before you got to the point of making the change. What was it that finally motivated you to? Was it a doctor or?
No, because like I said, I hadn't even gone to the doctor at that time. I think it was just a point in time. I mean, I'm typically a very ambitious, driven person, and I realize, like they were saying in regards to setting goals and so forth, I typically do the same thing at the beginning of every year, at least for the next year or up to 3 years. And that was one of the things that I set out to do is, within the next 6 months, I'm going to start eating healthy, change my lifestyle, go to the gym every day. And so, I mean, I did it. I mean, it wasn't like someone told me to do it or anything like that. It was internal motivation. I think that's the way to really achieve something, right? You talk to successful people, they say, I got here because I was passionate about it, right? I mean, I think that passion is stronger than anyone telling you to do something or prescribing some way to do something.
Any other?
I think it's your environment. So you are who you surround yourself with. And I didn't think my mother would be right, but she was definitely right on the mark with that one. So like, for example, in Immokalee, Florida, your only option for the most part is a convenience store at a gas station. So these options that they have to make themselves healthier might not always be with direct accessibility to them, you know?
Yeah.
So in addition, if your parents are raising you to be an obese child with the food that they provide you with, and you're not educated outside of that, then how would you know any better? So I think it definitely, an environment is a crucial component to that motivation.
And your question? And then I'm going to add my own question to it, and then we have to, unfortunately.
I'd like to explore the doctor-patient relationship and attitudes towards virtual visits as opposed to in-person visits. One of you said you had a doctor because you're supposed to. You know, how old do you have to be before you need a doctor, and do you need a doctor continuously, or will any doctor do? And is it face-to-face or is it virtual? What are your thoughts about that?
So I think with MD VIP and other concierge services, or boutique physicians as we'd like to call them, some like to call them, I think that's the way I would like to interact with my doctor. I don't want to go to the doctor's office anymore, knowing that I'm expecting my blood work to come back within normal limits. So I want to be able to text him, Skype with him if we need to. And I know that this is happening right now, and I think actually there's a dichotomy going on, and there's a greater disparity among the concierge services and then your general clinician or traditional physician. And so I think that ties in a whole nother topic, which is the economic approach, is how are we going to make this feasible, because right now the socioeconomic disparity is getting larger, and that's going to create a change in whether I'm able to afford a concierge physician or not. But this is how, I don't know, I can't speak for all millennials, but this is how I would like to communicate with them. I don't want to spend 2 hours of my day driving to the doctor's office, waiting, seeing the doctor, you know, waiting to check out. I can text him, I can Skype with him, show him the bruise on my arm, send him a picture message. And I know it's being done right now, but now we need to make sure that's a mass audience, or it reaches the tipping point.
Any other thoughts on that?
I agree
I agree
completely.
completely, yeah.
Anybody disagree?
I kind of disagree. I think that's kind of where medicine exceeds, is the patient and doctor-patient relationship. And you know, it's part of being human and talking to someone face to face. You're kind of socializing yourself with the real world. And you know, I could easily, you know, say I have a mental health issue. I'm gonna pretend like that I'm perfectly fine if I'm talking to a certain doctor. You know, I just think I think it's good for some people, like in today's society, but I think currently where we're at, I would struggle with it, you know.
I guess that's one reason you're up here in person and not just on a video.
Yes.
So I'm curious, genetic testing. Do you want to know your genome?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No. Why not?
My grandfather had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, and we never actually found out if it is familial or if it was from other means, and it was something that the family decided we would not want to know. I personally would not be able to live the life that I live knowing that I was predisposed to that. So.
Because you don't think it would make you even more health conscious so that you could delay it? Or?
Well, it certainly would, but my grandfather lived with that disease for 20 years, and I grew up my whole life living that, and it is, for lack of a better word, hell.
Yeah.
So that is not something that I would be able to mentally prepare myself for.
Okay, well, I hope you don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. I mean, seriously,
I don't.
it's...
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why we never actually went through it, because it's one of those things that's out of sight, out of mind, and I just live a healthy lifestyle. So.
Well, sorry for raising it.
Yeah.
And you would?
I'm very lucky to have a very healthy family. We don't have predispositions or anything like that, or quite that serious. So I would personally like to know, yes, if there's anything I can look out for, if there's anything in my current diet that I need to change, or if there's anything I'm currently doing that could affect me down the road to kind of prevent me from doing the things I want to do.
But you're not just
long-term.
curious in general, you see it as utilitarian.
I am curious in general too.
Okay.
The fact it's utilitarian helps.
Any other thoughts? Yes or no, would you do it?
No, I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
know.
I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
know as well.
I just think it, you know, if I find out I have something, I'm not living the life I want to be living, you know, beforehand. I feel, you know, say I have something, you know, I'm gonna, you know, change my whole life around, and I think life is just full of surprises. And
Well, so disclosure, I'm on the board of 23andMe, and I have to say one thing, which is you usually don't find out you have something. You find out what your risk is. And, you know, as part of the general population, your risk of being obese approaches 50%. Based on everything you've told us about your lifestyles, your risk is about 5%. So you can affect those risks. And it's clear these guys are great, but I'm not sure they're totally typical. And I want to thank you. I thought you were awesome. Thank you guys for the questions. Thank you very much, everybody. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Karen Amstutz of Magellan. This is a slight change from your program.